This time, on Only in America, the Senate opens up an immigration debate. Is it freewheeling or free-falling?
We're going to have something in the Senate that we haven't had in a while. It's real debate on an issue where we really don't know what the outcome is going to be.
And if they pull off a deal which protects dreamers, will the president even sign it?
It is time for Congress to act and to protect Americans. Every member of Congress should choose the side of law enforcement and the side of the American people. That's the way it has to be.
And later, from Oklahoma, what happened when a first grader saw the place known locally as Color Town?
My first response to my father was, why don't they come to our church? Because our life was centered around the church. And he said, well, they have their own church. And then I said, well, why don't they come to my school? And he said, oh, they have their own school. And somehow in my heart that never made sense.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Anne Lyon with Only in America. Less than a month from the March 5th DACA deadline, Congress is set to begin a legislative debate that is as unpredictable as a certain Twitter feed. For one Republican senator, the pro-immigration Jeff Flake of Arizona, there's room for optimism.
There will be proposals put forward. The president put together a framework that I think is constructive. There are bipartisan groups working, several of them in the Senate, to come to a solution. I think that we can, but if there is a problem in the end and we can't reach that, I think that these dreamers need to be protected.
But a word to the wise. It's all about the details. For example, after promising work by Latino Republicans last week, the LA Times blared, White House floats an offer to keep legal immigration at $1 million per year instead of cutting it. But read a bit further down and details emerge. Protections for 1.8 million DACA recipients, plus clearing existing backlogs would, the paper says, effectively make up for the cuts in other immigration categories for about 13 years. Then the LA Times wrote, if Congress takes no additional action to add or expand visa categories, the total number of people allowed to resettle in the U.S. each year likely would decline by hundreds of thousands. So the White House framework aims to do two things here. One, replace legal immigration with DACA recipient green cards. To be clear, DACA recipients are people who are already here and contributing. And second, the framework aims to clear out existing backlogs. That is taking existing channels for legal immigration and repurposing them to address an unresolved need. I see this as a cut to legal immigration now and into the future. Much of this week's debate will focus on family immigration, derisively tagged as chain migration. It's important to remember that U.S. citizens and green card holders cannot sponsor family members such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, in-laws, and cousins for immigration. Our opponents have led thinking people to believe dreamers, much less any immigrant, will sponsor untold numbers of relatives' entry to the U.S. This is not true. Shika Dalmia of Reason wrote that the term chain migration, quote, demonizes the family-based immigration process while masking the real agenda, breaking up foreign-born families so as to encourage immigrants here to self-deport and discourage new ones from coming. Along the way, she points out, the U.S. system admits an average of only 2 to 2.5 family members of immigrants per year for every 1,000 residents. That's the same rate as Canada and Australia, countries whose skills-based systems are Trump's alleged models. Okay, let's take a deep breath. Where to from here? Leader McConnell has set up a process where a shell bill from the House will serve as the vehicle for amendments in the Senate this week. As McConnell put it, whichever amendment gets to 60 wins. Republican Senators Grassley, Cornyn, Tillis, Perdue, Lankford, Cotton, and Ernst set the right edge of the debate as they announced the introduction of the enforcement-heavy Secure and Succeed Act. This, in my opinion, is a Stephen Miller wish list. Good luck getting that to 60 Senate votes. So as we move through the next week or two, watch a few different contingents. First, the Harris-Booker-Warren group will work to hold down the left, and what I would affectionately call the mob of moderates, led by Senators Collins and Manchin, will aim for a compromise. Where Senators Durbin and Graham land in all this remains to be seen. So all to say, game on. I'm Ali Nirani. You can keep tabs on the debate and all the other immigration issues in play at immigrationforum.org. And shoot us an email if you'd like to receive my daily updates. Coming up, the Wesleyan Church leader who says immigration has already made America great.
The real key has been, though, most recently, which really disturbs me, is the divisiveness that has taken place. And suddenly understanding making America great again and not realizing that to make America great again includes all the new people that are coming, because that's how it was great to begin with.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
This is Only in America. I'm Ali Noorani. The Reverend Anne Lyon is the ambassador of the Wesleyan Church in America. They have recently established immigration connection centers in many Wesleyan churches, offering support, connections, spiritual guidance, and low-cost legal help. We talked about her personal journey and her concerns about the atmosphere surrounding today's immigration debate.
Tell me a little bit about growing up in Oklahoma, because right out of the bat, we're going to bring that Oklahoma accent out.
We are. Yeah, you can't get away from it. Right. It's just there. Well, I grew up in segregated Oklahoma, and actually the only time I saw anyone that was not like me was when this woman, African-American woman, came to get our trash every week. And I think she was on the street. It wasn't just ours, but she must have had contracts with people. I don't know how all the business worked. And I saw her, and it was early in the morning, and she would be singing. And I was so intrigued, and I would just go to the door and plaster my face against the window on that door and look at her and listen to her. And so I just kept saying, where does she live? And finally one day, my father caved in and said, okay, I'll take you where she lives. Now, my father was a minister, and so he had compassion, but yet highly influenced by the culture. And so I'll never forget the day that we went to what was then known as Colored Town. The pavement ended, the dirt road began. Totally different kind of housing, different kind of smells of different kinds of food, all of this kind of thing. And I saw a group of people I had never seen before in a group that large. And so my first response to my father was, why don't they come to our church? Because our life was centered around the church. And he said, well, they have their own church. And then I said, well, why don't they come to my school? I was in kindergarten, first grade. And he said, oh, they have their own school. And somehow in my heart that never made sense. And I was 5 or 6 years old at that time, and it's never gotten away from me. And so those issues of justice have always been there. So that impacted my life then later through the civil rights movement and continues to this day. It's just there.
So then, tell me a little about the ascent of your leadership within the church, because it's striking to me as a person who's outside of the evangelical community. I've been fortunate to get to know a lot of incredible people within the community, but there are, it just feels like you were one of the first women to play a leadership role, not just at a local level, but a national level, even an international level. What was that journey like?
It's been very interesting. I think, first of all, you have to forget that you are a female, your gender, and you have to keep thinking what your agenda is, or what your mission is. Maybe I should say that in a better way. And so that I was driven by this mission of justice. And then, as obviously as I grew, I began to see it in Scripture. Then I began to explore my own church history life, which is John Wesley, and began to see it in that context. And then in my own Wesleyan Church denomination, began to take a look at, we were founded by abolitionists who gave their life. I mean, there was one point that there was a statement made in North Carolina, there were not enough nooses to hang all the Wesleyans they wanted to hang. I mean, that's pretty radical. I don't know that we'd get many people signing up today. So it all that began to build. Well, this is what people of God should be about. So that has always been my journey. Then I founded World Hope International, which is an NGO, and partnered it with the Wesleyan Church. However, with the church, but other faith groups as well. And then that brought me to speak in a lot of churches and preach in a lot of churches and just keep preaching that this is what it means to be a follower of Christ. And then I was elected to the highest position in the church, which was, we had ordained the first woman to ever be ordained in the United States in 1859.
Wow.
But it takes a long time. So I was elected in 2008. So what is that, 150 years or something? So it's those issues. I think there's always those issues regarding women and issues of power and authority. You can do certain things, but then we, in other words, other places, we call it the glass ceiling type thing. So I think part of that, I think, is the church began to hear this message and they wanted to follow that. They wanted to follow that piece. And so then I led for 8 years in that. I might also add, Ollie, it was interesting because I was the CEO of World Hope, and we used to have an organization. It's changed its name to Accord now. It used to be the Association of Evangelical Relief and Development Organizations, and I was the only female leading that at that time. So it was one day I hadn't even thought about it. One day I was in a meeting and I thought, hey, I'll declare I'm the only woman sitting here, and. So but they're more leading now. So it's open up. I don't know that I opened it, but just it's become a little more normal. I think part of this is about not necessarily prejudice against women. It's just what feels normal. And so if we can break the whole normal pattern, I think that's a great place.
Create a new norm.
Create a new norm. That's exactly right. And I think that's where we are in immigration. Create a new norm for people of all races and ethnicities and whatever.
So turning to immigration, that obviously that's the only thing I'm allowed to talk about. So I find it really, there are very few people with the experiences that you've had in the international relief space, obviously growing up in Oklahoma, but then as the head of the Wesleyan Church, you shared with me a number of experiences in the Midwest. So how do you kind of weave those experiences together when you spend time overseas thinking about refugee resettlement and the delivery of relief, but also helping a church in northern Indiana diversify and thrive?
First of all, maybe it's an advantage that we have in the church because we can point to Scripture. For example, just last Sunday, I was in a church in northern Indiana, and the pastor, and they were having a missions conference, and so there were flags all over from all different countries. It gave them great opportunity, and the pastor opened with having Holy Communion that morning. And so when I stood up to speak, I said, it's so wonderful to do communion because this is the thing that binds us together all over the world. It isn't the flags. I hope they got the message. It isn't the flags, but it is being part of the kingdom of God and the communion of Jesus Christ in his death and life and resurrection. That's what binds us together. So I think when people can begin to see that in the Christian faith, that we're bound together all over the world, it helps. It helps to break this.
So sorry to jump in here, but it's a question I've been grappling with for a little bit now. From our perspective as the National Immigration Forum, my talking points end at the border. Meaning, we don't talk a lot about why people are migrating globally.
Oh, okay, yeah.
On the other hand, I think many Americans, if not most Americans, see the immigration debate more and more in a global context. And I feel like the faith community helps people in ways that, frankly, the rest of us don't, in terms of helping people understand immigration to the U.S. in a global context. I don't know, would you agree, disagree? I think people see this as a global issue, not necessarily just as an issue of, who is here.
Very definitely. For example, regarding El Salvador, I was in El Salvador in '85, which was in the midst of all this tear up and war and everything. I saw the pain. I heard the stories there of the disappeared, as they were referred to. And then at that time, many of us were involved in what was called the Overground Railroad. So churches were opening up sanctuaries for El Salvadorans to get away from the suffering and the pain and the persecution that they were experiencing to get up here. So again, that becomes the faith community understanding this even in ways that are international. And then certainly when we look at Syrian refugees and even if we're looking at Christians, but I think we're certainly open to all faiths, not just, but if you want to narrow it even to Christians, then what about how do we take care of the people within our own body, within our own care? So I think that the faith community does see it globally in a stronger way. Now, the real key has been, though, most recently, which really disturbs me, is the divisiveness that has taken place. And suddenly understanding making America great again and not realizing that to make America great again, or great, whatever you want to call it, includes all the new people that are coming, because that's how it was great to begin with. So if you can begin to draw those, connect all those dots, I think that begins to help as well.
So then how do you, I think that, somebody is sitting at home on a Tuesday night watching Fox News, and they see that boat of Syrian refugees crossing the Mediterranean. I think their assumption is that the people on that boat are going to be their next door neighbor in 2 weeks. And it terrifies them. And it's, I think it's a legitimate fear, right? Because people don't know what's happening. So how do we do a better job of helping people understand why that family is fleeing and why they see the U.S. as their salvation, as their protection?
I think we have not painted the picture yet of why the people are fleeing. We see wars, we see bombs, we see all this, we see the tragedy, we see the child on the beach, that kind of tears at our heart, but then we don't know what else. And then there's also this discussion, well, they really want to stay in their home. Well, of course they do. They want to stay in their home. But how can they stay in their home? So we've got some of this propaganda going out. Well, it's less money to pay for them to stay in their home. And that's what I can never understand. Can't you see the picture? There is no home for them to stay. So I think there's confusion for folks. It's interesting because I do think there are people who do have a good heart and they want to do good, but they can't. There's too much confusion, too many mixed messages happening out there. So there's the message that the immigrant's going to kill your daughter, rape your daughter, whatever, or the immigrant's going to turn your country into a Muslim to Sharia law. All of these fear. So the fear has really overcome the trying to think rationally. So it seems to me it's incumbent upon us as of all faiths to confront this fear in a variety of ways. And the forum is helping us. I really like the kind of stuff that you send out with just facts, and that really helps. If we can really ground our discussions in facts, then I think that begins to help. I've even seen people change just on a simple way. When they find out, they think that all undocumented people, that they never pay tax, or they don't. When they find out how much they contribute back to the, I've seen people. I've never heard that before. Well, that makes me change. I've even heard people say that.
First of all, before we get into some of the local examples, can you describe the footprint of the Wesleyan Church?
The footprint. Well, actually, we are in about 100, just right at 100 countries around the world. So we have that footprint, and then we are in. I think we're in every state in the union. Some presence. There's this vision now of a presence in every zip code. So I don't know how all that's going to be. But there is that aggressiveness to mobilize folks.
But there's also, my understanding is also that there's a really deep presence within the Midwest.
Yes.
Right. So that's a part of the country that is obviously undergoing a lot of these changes. And it feels that, the combination of the relationships built in the church along with the facts begin to change people's minds. So, in your travels over the years and the conversations you've had, you mentioned that you've seen people change, but could you paint that picture of what that looks like?
Well, I think part of it is trust in me. So you have to build trust with the people. It can't be someone who flies in, and yet it has been. I look at our own Matt Sorens, who really helped the people in Kansas to begin to grapple with this and understand this in ways. But I think it comes from someone that they trust, and to continue those conversations, and then to get to know people. We now in the Wesleyan Church have these immigrant connection centers in churches, and this has done a huge amount of changing people's perceptions, because here are immigrants coming into the church, someone's trying to help them, papers, or that's when they realize, really, we can't do anything until laws change. And that's there's always that immediate thing. Well, why don't they just get legal? It's like, just go down and get your driver's license. It's not that
simple.
Go
get your library card.
Yeah, Right. And so then when they begin to understand that's why we're talking about immigration reform, a comprehensive immigration reform, that we have to change all kinds of laws. The other piece of this is that when we do the law stuff, so I always remind people, laws need to be changed. Remember, slavery was a law. You could have slaves. And we said, no, that law is wrong. And that's where we are. So that begins to say, we need to think of it in those terms. But in the Midwest, we're really pushing regarding multi-ethnic churches. the church is for everyone, and obviously using scripture in this way, and we're seeing that to begin to heal. It's not easy. Multi-ethnic churches are not easy, because one of the things that I say, you can be in multi-ethnic church on Sunday, but can you be multi-ethnic 6 days a week? And that becomes but that becomes a journey that we move, and I think that's what began to exponentially help.
And the connections, the immigration centers really help in that process.
Oh yes,
right?
Absolutely, they really do, because again, just like you and me, how we change when we know a person. I always think of wars that we have, and then how we train people to hate. I mean, World War II, we hated Germans, we were trained to hate Japanese, and then how it turned out. Just a little personal note, in Kansas, my grandmother lived, and I remember walking when I was a little kid, walking up the pathway, or a little road with her, and she said to me, now, there was a German family at the end of the road, and they were farmers, and they sold eggs and milk. And she said, no one else will buy eggs and milk from the Grabers because they're Germans, but I love them, and we're going to buy all of our eggs and milk from them. Now, I didn't know what in the world she meant then. I thought, this is strange, because I was told that I had German heritage. Nobody had said they didn't like me, but they had just come from Germany, first generation. So now that I look back on that, maybe there was some early training from my little grandmother about, I don't care, I love them, So I worry now, too, how we're being trained subtly and not so subtly to hate. And then that, of course, obviously seeps into all levels of society.
So I've got two last questions for you. In this context, in this moment where training to hate is both subtle and not, what gives you hope?
The hope I have is that people can move above the stuff being said, the rabble stuff, and they can choose to move to a higher moral level and really see this at a higher moral level. And I think that's where it really is incumbent upon us that are leaders, is to keep calling that. I don't think we can just gripe about it, which I do plenty, but I think we have really got to take courage, and leaders have got to come to the table and take courage and call it. We have to call it, or people won't hear it.
And then last question. So the podcast is named Only in America. So every guest that I've had so far, I asked them to finish this sentence. Only in America, ...
Only in America am I always assured of a soft bed.
Well, there we go. Joanne, thank you very, very much for the time.
Yeah,
really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Reverend Joanne Lyon is the ambassador for the Wesleyan Church. There's more about Joanne at immigrationforum.org, and subscribe to our podcast while you're there. Only in America is produced by Megan Wetmore and Emily Chow. The executive producer is Kathleen Farrell, and I'm Ali Noorani from the National Immigration Forum.